The morning Thomas Hayes rode his horse up the ridge trail, he stopped where he always stopped to look at the valley below. But the valley was wrong. He sat on his horse trying to understand what was different. Not the snow. Snow changed how things looked, but this was something else. It was November 15th, 1836, in the hills 8 miles west of what would eventually become Forsyth, Missouri. The first real snow of the season had fallen overnight. Not heavy, perhaps 6 inches. Thomas had ridden this trail dozens of times, knew every turn, knew what the view from this ridge should show. He knew the valley the way a person knows familiar ground, without thinking, without measuring, just knowing. But this morning, looking down, something was wrong in a way he could not name. He dismounted and walked to the edge of the ridge, trying to find the angle that would make the view match his memory. The morning sun was climbing, the air cold but clear. Visibility should be good, but what he was seeing made no sense. Thomas had visited the valley 2 days before, had ridden down this same trail, had spoken with Martin Chen about borrowing an auger, had seen smoke rising from chimneys. 4 families lived down there, 17 people who had cleared land and built cabins and established lives in the low ground between the ridges. Now, looking down, he saw only forest, not the settlement covered by snow, not buildings obscured by weather, just unbroken forest, trees standing thick and close, no clearings visible, no structures, no signs that humans had ever been there. Thomas remounted and rode down the trail that should lead to the valley floor, the same trail he had used 2 days before. The path was still there, marked by the trees that flanked it, descending through terrain he recognized. But as he rode lower, as he should have been approaching the cleared land where the settlement stood, the forest grew thicker rather than opening into farmland. He reached what should have been the edge of the Chen family's property, marked by a distinctive lightning-struck oak that stood at the corner of their fence line. The oak was there, scarred and unmistakable, but there was no fence, no cleared ground, no cabin. Just forest continuing past the oak as if it had always been forest, as if clearing had never occurred. Thomas rode forward slowly, watching for any sign of the settlement he knew existed here. The Chen cabin should be 50 yards ahead. The creek should be visible through the trees to his left. The trail that connected all 4 families should intersect with the path he was following, but he found none of these things. He found only forest, trees standing close together in patterns that suggested old growth, that suggested decades without human disturbance. The ground beneath the snow showed no signs of recent clearing, no stumps, no evidence that anyone had cut timber here within memory. He stopped his horse in what should have been the center of the settlement, where 4 families had built their lives, where he had stood 2 days before, talking with Martin Chen about spring planting and the quality of last year's harvest. He turned slowly, looking in all directions, trying to find any landmark that would orient him, that would prove he was where he believed he was. The lightning-struck oak behind him, the ridgeline above, the slope of the land matching his memory of the valley's contours. He was in the right place, but the settlement was gone. Not destroyed. Destroyed would leave debris, would leave evidence of structures, even if those structures had burned or collapsed. The settlement was simply absent, replaced by forest that looked as if it had never been disturbed. Thomas rode in widening circles, searching for any trace of human presence. He found the creek, running where it should run, clear water flowing over stones. But he found no evidence that anyone had ever built near it. No signs of the small dam Martin Chen had constructed. No remains of the water channel that fed the garden. He found places where cabins should stand and found only trees. He found where fields should spread and found only undergrowth. He found where paths should connect and found only game trails winding through forest that showed no mark of human passage. After 2 hours of searching, Thomas sat on his horse in the cold morning, trying to process what he was seeing, or what he was not seeing. 4 families, 17 people total, adults and children, people he knew by name, people he had spoken with 48 hours before, gone without leaving any evidence they had ever been here. The forest around him was quiet. Normal forest quiet. Wind and bare branches, occasional bird calls, the small sounds that winter woods made. Nothing felt wrong except what was missing. Nothing seemed dangerous except the complete absence of what should be present. Thomas rode back up to the ridge, needing distance, needing perspective, needing to see the valley from above again to confirm what he had found or failed to find on the ground. From the ridgeline, the valley still showed only unbroken forest, still showed no signs of settlement, still looked exactly like uninhabited land that no one had ever tried to farm. He turned his horse east and rode toward the nearest settlement, a cluster of farms 5 miles away, where other families lived who might have information, who might have seen something, who might be able to explain what he could not understand. The ride took an hour through snow that was deeper in places where drifting had occurred. Thomas arrived at the Harrison farm mid-morning, his horse breathing hard from the pace he had maintained. Daniel Harrison was outside splitting wood when Thomas rode up, his expression shifting from greeting to concern when he saw Thomas's face. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked. "The valley settlement," Thomas said. "It's gone." Daniel set down his axe. "Gone how?" "Just gone. I went to check on them this morning, and there's nothing there. Just forest. Like they were never there." Daniel's face showed confusion. "The Chen place? The Bartons?" "All of them. 4 families. I can't find any trace of them. No cabins, no cleared land, nothing." "That doesn't make sense." "I know." Daniel called for his sons, and together the 3 men rode back toward the valley, Thomas leading them along the trail he had ridden twice already that morning. As they approached the ridge, Thomas felt both hope and dread, hope that others would see what he could not, would point out what he had missed, would find the settlement where it should be. Dread that they would confirm what he had seen, would verify that 17 people had somehow vanished along with every sign of their presence. They crested the ridge together and stopped. Daniel Harrison sat on his horse, staring down at the valley, his face showing the same confusion Thomas had felt. "Where?" Daniel started, then stopped. "You see it too," Thomas said. It was not a question. "I see forest," Daniel replied. "But the Chen place should be visible from here. That big barn he built. It should stand out." "It's not there." They rode down together, 3 men instead of 1, searching the valley floor for evidence of settlement they all remembered seeing. They found the lightning-struck oak. They found the creek. They found terrain that matched their memory of the valley's geography. They found no cabins, no cleared land, no tools, no fence posts, no gardens, no stumps, no paths, no evidence that humans had ever lived in this valley, or disturbed the forest that grew thick and undisturbed across ground where fields should have been. Daniel's older son rode to where he believed the Barton cabin had stood and dismounted, walking in circles looking at the ground. "There should be something," he called out. "Foundation stones, nails, anything. You can't build a cabin and have it disappear without leaving some trace." But there was no trace. The ground beneath the snow showed only the natural accumulation of leaves and organic matter that forest floor collected over years of undisturbed growth. They searched through the afternoon, the three men separating to cover more ground, calling to each other when they found anything that seemed significant. A flat stone that might be foundation, a depression that might be where a well had been dug. But each potential find turned out to be natural, turned out to be the kind of feature that forest created without human involvement. As the sun dropped toward the horizon and the day's warmth began fading into evening cold, they gathered at the center of what should have been the settlement. "We should get others," Daniel said. "More people searching. Maybe someone will find what we're missing." Thomas nodded, though he felt certainty that more searchers would find what he had found. Nothing. That the absence was absolute, was complete, was not something that careful searching would overcome. They rode back to the Harrison farm in gathering darkness. Daniel sent his sons to neighboring farms to gather men for a more extensive search. By nightfall, 12 men had assembled, all of them knowing the valley settlement, all of them having visited at various times, all of them able to confirm that 4 families had been living there as recently as a week ago. They planned to search the valley at first light, to bring tools for probing ground, to approach the mystery with systematic thoroughness that would locate what individual searching had missed. Thomas spent the night at the Harrison place, lying awake in the darkness, thinking about the forest where settlement should be, about 17 people who had vanished without leaving evidence of their existence, about the impossibility of what he had seen, or failed to see. The search party assembled before dawn and rode to the valley as morning light was just beginning to define the landscape. 12 men who knew the area, who had visited the settlement, who could identify where each cabin had stood and where each family had cleared their land. From the ridge, the valley still showed only forest. They descended together and spread out, each man taking a section to search thoroughly. They walked grid patterns. They examined every foot of ground. They looked for anything that would indicate human presence. Charcoal from fires, pottery shards, metal from tools, glass from windows, anything that settlement left behind even after buildings were destroyed. They found nothing. By afternoon, the consensus was forming, not spoken aloud but visible in faces and gestures and the way men kept returning to spots where they were certain cabins had stood, standing in confusion at finding only undisturbed forest. Then William Baker called out. He was standing where the Chen cabin should have been, pointing at the ground. "Here," he said. "Look at this." The others gathered. In the snow, partially visible, was a line of stones. Flat stones, arranged in what might be a rectangle, what might be a foundation. "I helped build that cabin," Baker said, his voice tight with relief or vindication or hope. "I know where we set the corners. This is it. This has to be it." They cleared snow carefully, exposing more of the stone line. The rectangle was the right size for a cabin foundation. The stones were flat and deliberately placed, not natural arrangement. This was evidence. This was proof. Daniel Harrison knelt, examining the stones closely. He ran his hand along them, measuring spacing, checking alignment. Then he stopped. "These stones are settled," he said quietly. "Look at the moss. Look at how the earth has grown around them." The others looked. Harrison was right. The stones were old, not 3 years old, but decades old at least. The moss that covered them was thick and established. The soil had built up around their edges in ways that took years, not seasons. "This can't be the foundation," Baker said, but his voice carried no conviction. "It's too old," Harrison confirmed. "Whatever this was, it wasn't built 3 years ago. The hope that had flared, died as quickly as it had ignited. The stones were something, perhaps an old structure from decades before, perhaps natural formation that only looked deliberate. But they were not evidence of recent settlement, not proof that the families had been here. The men returned to searching, but the energy had changed. The brief moment of thinking they had found something, of believing the mystery might be solvable, had passed. What replaced it was heavier, the understanding that absence could be absolute, that people could vanish without leaving traces, that searching could recover. William Baker, who had helped Martin Chen build his cabin 3 years before, stood where he knew that cabin had been and said quietly, "I drove nails into that wall. I know the exact spot where we set the corner posts. This is the place, but there's nothing here." Others confirmed similar certainties. Exact locations remembered. Specific details of construction or land clearing, absolute knowledge of where things had been, and absolute absence of any evidence that those things had ever existed. As evening approached and the search yielded nothing, the men gathered to discuss what should be done. The options were limited and unsatisfying. Continue searching in the hope that thoroughness would reveal what was hidden, or accept that the settlement and its occupants had vanished in a way that made no sense and that left no trail to follow. "We should check other valleys," someone suggested. "Maybe they relocated. Maybe there's some explanation and they moved somewhere else." But this explanation satisfied no one. People did not relocate overnight, did not take every trace of their settlement with them, did not erase all evidence of years of occupation. And even if such relocation were possible, where would they have gone in late November, with snow on the ground and winter approaching? Over the following days, searches expanded to neighboring valleys, to trails that led away from the area, to any place the missing families might have traveled. Riders went to distant settlements asking if anyone had seen 17 people moving together, if anyone had information that would explain the disappearance. No information came. No one had seen the families. No one knew where they might have gone. The valley remained forested and empty, showing no sign that humans had ever disturbed it. By late November, the searching stopped. There was nowhere left to look. No strategy that had not been tried, no explanation that fit the evidence, or the lack of evidence. 17 people had lived in a valley, had cleared land and built homes and established lives. Then, after the first significant snowfall of the season, they were gone, and the valley showed no indication they had ever been there. The disappearance became known throughout the region, not as solved mystery, but as event that resisted explanation, that violated basic understanding of how the world worked. People did not vanish. Settlements did not erase themselves. Forest did not replace cleared land overnight. But all of these impossible things appeared to have happened in the valley that Thomas Hayes had visited on November the 13th and found empty on November 15th after the first snow of winter had fallen and covered whatever transformation had occurred during those 2 days. The valley was avoided after that, not officially forbidden or declared dangerous, just quietly avoided by people who knew the story, who understood that something had happened there that could not be explained and that might happen again. The forest that grew there was left undisturbed. No one attempted to settle in the valley or clear its land or disturb the trees that stood where settlement had been. Years passed. The story was told and retold, details becoming less certain as time and distance made memory unreliable. Some versions said the families had fled. Some said they had died and been buried by forces unknown. Some said the valley itself had taken them, had reclaimed what had been built on land that had not wanted settlement. but the core facts remained consistent across all versions. 4 families had lived in a valley, had been present in mid-November of 1836, and had been absent after the first snow, leaving no trace of their existence or their departure. Thomas Hayes never returned to the valley. He moved away from the area the following spring, unwilling to live near the place where 17 people had disappeared and where forest had replaced settlement in the span of 2 days. He told the story occasionally when asked, but he offered no theories, no explanations, no speculation about what had happened. He had seen what he had seen. Presence, then absence, with nothing in between to explain the transition. The valley is still there, though few people know its history now. The forest that grows there is old and thick and undisturbed. In winter, after the first significant snow, some travelers report that the valley looks wrong when viewed from the ridge. Not different in the way snow changes landscapes, wrong in a way they cannot name. Most keep riding. A few stop their horses where the trail crests the ridge, trying to understand what they are seeing, trying to identify what should be there but is not.